Yeah, we can start. We are live. Yeah, if we can start.
So Sanjay ji can introduce PSG and then I can come in first.
Okay, so shall I start? I thought
Yes.
that you are going to start and then you're okay, great. Good morning and JaiBhim everyone. I'm Sanjay Bhagat and I'd just like to introduce the PhD to the news audience who are attending to recognize a mantra given by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to his followers for their emancipation is the foundation of Boston Study Group. The group, which started in 2015 with smaller number of Ambedkarites residents and students of New England area to study Dr. Ambedkar's writing, is now a very prominent Ambedkarite organization in the USA. Dr. Ambedkar's final words of advice were, "Ours is a battle, not for wealth, not for powers. Ours is a battle for freedom, for reclamation of human personality." BHG stands firm on this philosophy. Boston Study Group is an organization dedicated to working towards a just and equitable society. The Boston Study Group focuses on propagating Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's legacy, uniting people of common interest in the socio-economical development of the marginalized community in India, creating awareness between American and South Asian Indian community about social economic, social justice, and cultural struggles, collaborating with like-minded organizations and affiliate with the support institutions of higher education. Boston Study Group is a charitable, advocacy, educational, and research organization. It provides a platform for the expression of cultural, educational, social, and economic affairs of the people of South Asian Indian origin. Ambedkar Lecture Series is the Boston Study Group's flagship event. It is being organized every 2 weeks or every month to bring some amazing speakers to you to advance the understanding on caste, which intersects with many spheres in many different regions of the world. Find more about our lectures by visiting our website, www.bostonstudygroup.org. So with that brief introductions about the BHG, I will hand over to Arif, who is going to host today's session. Arif, it's you.
Thank you, Sanjay ji, and JaiBhim everyone, and good morning, folks who are in US, and good evening to folks who are joining from India. Thank you very much for joining. And as Sanjay ji was saying, that Ambedkar Lecture Series is our premier knowledge product in terms that we are having it live, but we also record it and put it on our website channel, on our YouTube channel. So people can go back and visit and learn from that. So thank you everybody for joining. And today's topic is very relevant on caste census, and we're extremely thankful to Professor Trina Vithayathil, who is going to present her research based on her book, Counting Caste, Census Politics, Bureaucratic Deflection, and Brahmanical Power in India. Many of you who are following caste census would know that now it is official. Like 2 or 3 days ago, the Gazette notification for house listing was issued in India. So the process has officially started, and in the spring summer of 2026, the on-ground work will start. So before we get into Professor Vithayathil's research, I would like to introduce her. So Professor Vithayathil is a sociologist and global studies scholar whose work focuses on caste, inequality, and urbanization in contemporary India. She is an associate professor of global studies at Providence College, Rhode Island, in the US, where she also serves as affiliated faculty in Asian studies. Her research examines social inequality through themes such as residential segregation, social demography, and political sociology, with a regional focus on South Asia, especially urban India. And as I mentioned earlier, she's also the author of Counting Caste, Census Politics, Bureaucratic Deflection, and Brahmanical Power in India. So before I hand over to her, just some format. So Professor Vithayathil is going to present for 35 to 45 minutes, and then I'm going to start with a few questions, and then we're going to open up for questions from other attendees. So thank you again very much, Professor Vithayathil, and over to you to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arif, and thank you to you and to Priya and the entire Boston Study Group for inviting me to share my research as part of the Ambedkar online lecture series. I'm so honored to be here with all of you today, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion after my presentation. I make sure, let me share my screen and then 1 second.
Yes, we can see your screen now. You just make it full screen. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So as a U.S. born member of the Indian diaspora, my family is part of the Syrian Christian community in Kerala, which has considerable social status and caste, educational, and economic privilege. My own caste and class privilege played an important role in accessing educational resources and professional and social networks that helped me to complete this project, which I started back in 2011. I collected data for this book between 2011 and 2016, first as a graduate student in sociology here in Providence at Brown University, and then later as a faculty member at Providence College, where I continue to teach undergraduate students. My book examines a recent failed nationwide enumeration of caste in India. Today, I'll focus on some findings from the book that I believe are highly relevant to the current moment. That is, given that the BJP political leadership announced last year that it would include a caste-wise enumeration in the long-delayed Indian census of 2021, which, as Arif mentioned, is scheduled to begin later this year, and then with the main round occurring in February 2027. While considerable media attention has focused on how Census 2027 will include the first enumeration of caste in independent India, the last completed decennial census of India, Census 2011, was also supposed to collect nationwide data on caste. So back in May 2010, the political leadership of India, then led, of course, by the Indian National Congress Party, found itself backed into a corner in response to organizing from caste census advocates. The Congress Party reversed its long-standing opposition to including a caste-wise enumeration in the decennial census when Finance Mukherjee publicly announced that, quote, caste will be included in the present census, end quote. National newspapers and TV media widely reported this historic change in census policy, as seen by the articles here, and caste census advocates were thrilled by their victory after months of organizing. Yet despite this very public concession by political leaders in May 2010, the victory for caste census advocates never materialized. So the research question at the heart of the book that I just wrote is, why did Census 2011 not collect caste-wise data even after the public concession by the Congress leadership in May 2010? I situate this question within the long history of the central government in India being resistant to the collection of caste-wise data in the decennial census censuses of independent India. Relatedly, why and how did the central government collect caste-wise data in another state survey, only to later and eventually fail to publish these caste-wise data? So I'll spend the next 25 or 30 minutes discussing some of my findings related to primarily the second question, and then speak for a few minutes also about how the lessons from this 2011 failed caste census relates to the upcoming census of 2027. In counting caste, I argue that the failed caste census occurred as a result of a process that I call bureaucratic deflection. The concept of bureaucratic deflection describes how the administrative bureaucracy publicly complies with the demands of historically excluded groups, while privately maneuvering or resisting the implementation of policies that challenge the unequal distribution of power or resources. More specifically, in the case of the 2011 caste count, the upper levels of the executive bureaucracy and allied institutions, both state institutions and those in society, subverted and sabotaged efforts to make caste power visible through the census. The concept of bureaucratic deflection builds upon a long scholarly tradition that theorizes the embeddedness of Brahmanism, that is the ideological structure of caste, within the state, despite ongoing efforts at resistance. Social scientists and historians study censuses as contested sites of knowledge-making, arguing that censuses are neither neutral counts of populations nor matters of bureaucratic routine. The entire process of conducting a census, from the development of a survey instrument to the compilation of data, is deeply political. During a particular historical period, contested visions of nationhood shape census making, which sociologist Bruce Curtis defines as, quote, the process of identifying political subjects and centralizing knowledge, end quote. Sociologist Tiana Pascal finds in her research on the country of Colombia that, quote, behind each estimate of the Black population lies a complex and contentious political process, end quote. Censuses are part of the administrative practices through which modern nation states exercise symbolic power, or, quote, constitute the given, as theorized by sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. In colonial India, census classification by caste and religion was intertwined with the broader project of empire building, including the use of these data for army recruitment, civil service appointments, educational policy formation, and stifling attempts to end British rule. At the same time, groups mobilizing against untouchability and caste hierarchy, as well as groups that were reformist in their orientation, both used census data and organized to shape the production of caste and religion data. Census making involves a process of commensuration, which sociologists Wendy Espeland and Mitchell Stevens describe as the creation of a set of comparable categories through, quote, the transformation of different qualities into a common metric, or by delineating a boundary around something that we wish to value, and the creation of a common metric to encompass everything within that boundary, end quote. Anthropological historian Nicholas Dirks argues that Brahmins disproportionately shaped the production and ranking of caste categories in the censuses of colonial India. Commensuration is a process as it involves the creation of categories and backing them by powerful institutions like the state. Sociologist Mara Loveman finds in her study of Latin American countries that, quote, the politics and practices of demarcating categorical divides and naturalizing them as group boundaries are endogenous to the processes that generate racial inequality and injustice, not exogenous to them, end quote. An extensive bureaucratic apparatus develops in the implementation of a census. Senior government administrators, planners, and consultants helped to envision and design the project, while state and local government employees and private sector actors play a key role in implementing the project and building consent to enroll participation from households. The scholarship on the politics of census making finds that at any particular historical moment, census making unfolds within broader institutional structures, norms, and ideologies embedded in the state and society. So you can see this literature is very different from maybe the common view that the census is a neutral exercise that captures an objective reality. To understand why the most recent caste count failed in India and the power dynamics that structured this failure, a robust conceptualization of Brahmanism is necessary. Yet historian G. Aloysius explains, quote, there has been much squeamishness within academia in using Brahmanism as an explanatory category in macro-level political studies, end quote. Brahmanism refers to the ideological structure of caste as conceptualized by anti-caste activist and social theorist Jyotirao Phule. Phule's 1873 text entitled Slavery critiques the relationship between Brahmanism and colonialism. He documents how the labor of oppressed castes fuels colonial wealth while caste elites hoard the institutional benefits of colonialism. He traces in detail the bureaucratic practices in local government offices and the embeddedness of Brahmanism within the state. G.P. Deshpande, writing about Phule's conceptualization of Brahmanism in an introductory essay to Phule's writings, states, quote, for Phule, Brahmanism was historical, constructed over time, and since it was the ideology of oppression and dominance, it had to be opposed and ultimately smashed, end quote. Building upon Phule's conceptualization of Brahmanism, Dr. Ambedkar challenged the embeddedness of Brahmanism in social, political, and economic life. In a 1938 speech to railway workers, when critiquing the two twin evils of Brahmanism and capitalism, he explained, quote, by Brahmanism, I do not mean the power, privileges, and interests of Brahmins as a community. I mean the negation of the spirit of liberty, equality, and fraternity. In that sense, it is rampant in classes and is not confined to the Brahmins alone. Indian census policy on caste is a battle over what sociologist Satish Deshpande calls castelessness, an ideology that emerged during state formation processes in the late colonial period, in which the identities of caste elites are largely rendered invisible in political life, while those of historically exploited castes are made hypervisible. Castelessness as an ideology and subjectivity has been crucial to the reproduction of caste power in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Deshpande describes how the institutionalization of castelessness through law and policy minimally required that caste-based privileges wear, quote, the garb of secular modernity, as caste was henceforth to be recognized only as a source of disadvantage or vulnerability, end quote. Castelessness frames caste as a problem of the oppressed, and in doing so obscures caste-based privilege and power and the relationality of caste. Castelessness has emerged and gained strength in response to subaltern assertions, and minimizes the role of inherited caste privilege in accessing social capital and material resources. To understand the politics surrounding the caste count, the failed caste count in 2011, and the actual processes of collecting caste-wise data as part of that failed project, I approached my research as an extended case study in which I examined a range of institutions and processes involved in the collection of caste-wise data between July 2011 and August 2016. I collected observational, interview, and document data in this project. I'll just highlight here that my observational data were largely from Bengaluru, Karnataka, while my interview and document data complemented the observational data from Bangalore, but also focused on the centralized planning and oversight for the caste-wise data collection, which centered largely in the central government in Delhi. I'm happy to discuss my methods and data in more detail later if there's interest. So I trace in the book how bureaucratic deflection unfolded in the case of the failed caste census of 2011. The first stage of the bureaucratic deflection involved the macro politics and decisions by the executive bureaucracy that pushed the promised caste-wise enumeration out of Census 2011 and into a revamped below poverty line, or BPL survey, which was renamed the Socioeconomic Caste Census, which I'll refer to throughout this talk as the SEC survey. Between May 2010 and July 2011, in a series of maneuvers involving multiple plot twists, the executive bureaucracy, and in particular, the Office of the Registrar General and Census Commissioner of India, or the ORGI, pushed the caste enumeration out of the decennial census and into two alternative state projects, before finally announcing that the caste-wise enumeration would be merged with the upcoming BPL, or below poverty line survey, the BPL survey had been conducted 3 times previously by the Ministry of Rural Development to identify rural families eligible for anti-poverty programs and benefits. The combined BPL survey and caste count, as I just mentioned, was renamed the Socioeconomic Caste Census, or the SEC survey, and data collection for the SEC survey started in July 2011, a few months after data collection for Census 2011 was completed. Like with previous censuses in independent India, Census 2011 limited data collection to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. The justification for limiting the census enumeration of castes to these 2 state administrative categories has been to have data on the population size of both state administrative categories to determine the size of their reservation quotas, of course here referring to a type of affirmative action. However, based on this justification, Census 2011 and 2001 and 2011, the last 2 decennial censuses of independent India, should have enumerated OBCs, or other backward classes, as there has been administrative requirement for these data following the extension of reservations to OBCs in the 1990s. However, both Census 2001 and 2011 did not collect data on the OBC or the general state administrative categories. Stage 2 of bureaucratic deflection consisted of the planning for the collection of caste-wise data in the SEC survey, which was overseen by the Ministry of Rural Development and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation, while the Indian Census Bureau, or the ORGI, played an advisory role to the Ministry of Rural Development. The third stage of bureaucratic deflection included ground-level survey operations. This is the actual process of collecting data from households. Enumeration for the SEC survey began in the second half of 2011, began at the end of July 2011, and was only supposed to take 6 months to complete. But it took anywhere from 21 months to collect the data in a state like Kerala to 46 months to collect the data in Rajasthan. And the data collection was also staggered across states because tablet PCs were being used for the first time. And they also, once they were finished being used in one state, they were then deployed to another one. So as mentioned, in my research, I focused stage 3 on ground level data, on ground level collection of data from households in Karnataka. Stage 4 of the bureaucratic deflection involved the stage of the analysis, cleaning, and eventual decision to bury the collected caste-wise data as they were deemed unusable by the state. Each stage in the process of bureaucratic deflection involved a series of maneuvers that I list here. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about all this today. I just want to sort of give you a sense of how many maneuvers were involved just in each one of these stages. So today I'll focus on a few key decisions made during the planning stage in stage 2 and how these decisions impacted the subsequent production of caste-wise data in stage 3 and stage 4. And in particular, I'm focusing on the planning stage or stage 2 as a parallel process is happening right now in preparation for Census 2027. So I think there's a lot there that we can think about with what should be happening right now or is not happening right now. So during the planning stage for the SEC survey, the survey instrument was, of course, designed. And it was designed to consist of 1 question on religion and 2 caste-related questions. The religion question was open-ended, and this is different from past decennial censuses. The first question on caste included 4 answer options: scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, other, and no caste tribe. Notably, it excluded the state administrative categories of OBC and general. In doing so, it failed to classify more than 75% of the population into a state administrative category, a major shortcoming for a supposed caste census. In addition, the inclusion first, the other answer option became a catch-all category, including diverse groups from Dalit Muslims to caste elite Brahmins. In addition, the inclusion of an explicit no caste answer option created an opt-out to the enumeration of caste. And as I'll discuss, this was deployed largely by caste elites in my observations. The second caste-related question was expected to produce detailed caste tribe information for those categorized as SC, ST, or other in the previous question. Yet it only included preset lists for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, as with past decennial censuses in independent India. For those classified as other, or coded 3 in the first caste-related question, the second caste-related question became open-ended. No effort was made to standardize the spelling of caste names, nor have local supervisors postcode the data into OBC and general administrative categories. Without caste lists for the catch-all other category, and since no effort was made to standardize the spelling of caste names, the survey would undoubtedly generate millions of responses for a population of over 1.2 billion people in 2011. In the planning stage of the SEC survey, the decision was made to use tablet PCs to directly record responses into a tablet, into a software program during the household interview itself. To do so, planners created a 2-person data collection team, an enumerator who would serve as lead interviewer, and a data entry operator, or DEO, who would enter responses into the tablet. Current or retired government employees would serve as enumerators. In Bangalore, this was largely Anganwadi workers, while government school teachers who had recently served as enumerators in the census of 2011 were ineligible to serve as enumerators again. Data entry operators, or DEOs, were hired by private companies who then after securing government contracts to oversee data entry operations in a particular state or district of a state. Enumerators were expected to participate in a 2-day-long training covering a range of topics, and their compensation for the training and the enumeration work reflected their role as the lead in the data collection team. Yet the training material neither instructed enumerators to standardize the spelling of caste names nor discussed how caste operates for religious minorities. Both the enumerator manual, the written manual, and the in-person training for enumerators specified two main points about the intersection of religion and caste. First, that data on caste should be collected from every individual, regardless to the answer on the question on religion. Second, the training materials emphasized how religion related to caste tribe for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. The instructions were vague in describing the broader relationship between religion and caste, particularly for religious minorities. And then contextualizing that within the fact that Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians are not included in the scheduled caste administrative category, this lack of clarity decreased the likelihood that the collected data would document caste oppression and privilege within the Muslim and Christian communities. Data entry operators, or DEOs, were expected to act as electronic stenographers and simply record household responses. As such, they received a short technical training on the use of the tablet and data entry program, often 15 to 30 minutes. They were not expected or trained to have a sociological understanding of the questions and answer options. Their comparatively low rates of compensation compared to the enumerators aligned with the view that the work of DEOs involved a mechanical data entry and did not require training in survey methods or in the survey instrument or questionnaire. The decisions made during the planning stage of the SEC survey regarding the design of the questionnaire and the training of enumerators and DEOs that I just discussed affected subsequent processes of collecting caste-wise data and their publication, or lack thereof. I'll briefly describe three such impacts, although several others also occurred. Based on observations of about 350 households during the SEC survey operations in Bengaluru, I found that the no caste tribe answer option was utilized as an opt-out by caste elites. My field notes here from the enumeration of a single-family home in central Bangalore illustrate how the offering up of the no caste option emerges in the back and forth between data collectors and the respondents. So I'll read a little bit from my field notes here. Before we knock on the door of a large single-family home in the center of Bangalore, Vijaya, the enumerator, puts an SEC survey sticker outside the door. A middle-aged man who turns out to be the son of the head of household arrives home as we are standing there. He looks at the sticker and reads aloud, socioeconomic caste census. He then says, caste census? Why? We are all one caste. We are all Indians. Mohan, the data entry operator, quickly replies, no problem, sir. That is also an option. 10 minutes later, midway through the interview, Mohan gets to the religion caste question for the head of household and offers up to the respondent. I'll put Indian and then no caste. Everyone gathered in the hall nods in agreement. The enumerator says to Mohan, you can also put Hindu and then no caste. Mohan replies as he continues to enter data into the tablet. Hindu, Muslim, Christians, all are Indian. For each member of the household, Mohan enters Indian for the religion field and chooses the no caste tribe option for the categorical question on caste. Mohan offers up the no caste answer option after sensing that asking about caste will offend the sensibilities of the respondent. Given the respondent's comment made about the survey even prior to the interviewer entering the household. In my observations, this most commonly occurred among a subset of very well-to-do households who identified as Hindu, but who did not see themselves as beholden to a caste identity. The data collectors would ask the question and usually give the option of no caste within the same statement. Sir, your caste? If you wish, you can say no caste. Once offered, the option was almost always taken, and there was usually a fairly clear signal beforehand that it would be. In my observations in Bengaluru, I also found that the no caste option was offered up by an enumerator when they sensed that the respondent might be hesitant to discuss caste due to the visible wealth and resources of the household, or in other cases when the respondents themselves expressed skepticism about the collection of caste data. The decision to include no caste tribe appeased comparatively privileged groups who saw little benefit to having their caste identity enumerated, and this decision obscured caste privilege. As such, the inclusion of the no caste tribe answer option embedded an ideology of castelessness in the survey design and the data. In addition, I also observed that the no caste tribe answer option was utilized during the enumeration of Muslim households. While accompanying a data collection team in central Bangalore, I met an enumerator who was interviewing households in a working class Muslim majority neighborhood near the data processing center for the ward. He explained that he simply entered no caste for all Muslim households without directly asking the households, as, quote, Muslims have no caste, end quote. The negligible discussion during the in-person training for enumerators on how caste hierarchy exists within the Muslim and Christian communities supported this data collector's decision to record no caste tribe for Muslims without asking the households themselves. The limited attention to the enumeration of caste among religious minorities during enumerator trainings also impacted the process of collecting data from households in other ways. So I'm going to now share my second and final excerpt from observations during re-enumeration exercises in a densely packed, predominantly Muslim neighborhood in now the periphery of the city of Bangalore. So a woman opens up the front door of a two-room home in an apartment complex. She nods at the three of us as Padma, the enumerator, asks her name. The woman answers Ansari, Faisal Ansari, giving the name of her husband. Padma continues, your name. The woman gives her name and slowly lists the name of her children. Shireen, the data entry operator, records the woman's responses in a school-sized notebook using a pencil. As the respondent states each name, Padma asks about each person's birth date. The woman doesn't know her husband's date of birth or her own, so Padma asks their age. After recording the birth dates of her four children, Shireen, who is the DEO, asks about the names of the women's parents and her husband's parents, about how much schooling each person has completed and the type of work that they do. The woman responds and Shireen records the information next to each name in her notebook. The interview continues and Shireen asks, religion. The woman responds, Muslim. Shireen follows up, caste. The woman responds, Ansari. Shireen shakes her head, Sunni or Shiite, and then follows up, Sunni, no? The woman nods. Shireen records Sunni and continues on with the interview. Later, as we are leaving, the woman asks about the purpose of the interview. Padma simply replies, the census. So in this interview, the data collectors and their supervisor perceive two caste divisions within Islam, Sunni and Shiite. They systematically record Sunni as a caste for all the Muslim families in this particular neighborhood, even in the instances when a family first offers up a caste identity. When asked about their caste, Sunni is sometimes, but not always, offered up by households. The families being interviewed know that the data are being collected for the government, but at the time of the data collection, the larger implications are not understood. So in this vignette, the data collector operator, the DEO or the data entry operator collects data on a religious sect, which is important for many families, instead of caste. In other areas of the city, when I observed the enumeration of Muslim families, usually in middle class or economically elite majority Hindu neighborhoods, the data collectors recorded Muslim or Islam as the religious identity and then entered the conveyed caste identity, such as Sharif or Patan, etc. In the absence of a plan for how to enumerate caste for over 200 million Muslims and Christians, that absence left DEOs and enumerators to fill the gap with their own understandings and structure patterns of commensuration with regards to caste for Muslims and Christians. In my observations of 20 to 25 Christian households across multiple neighborhoods in the city of Bangalore, I saw data collectors record Christian for the question on religion and denomination, for example, Methodist or RC for Roman Catholic for the question on caste. While the data on Christian denomination reflects an important identity, the data collectors failed to capture the caste information necessary to identify Dalit Christians who might be eligible for affirmative action benefits. I observed how the worldviews of DEOs and enumerators heavily shaped processes of caste-wise data collection for Muslims and Christians. Along with the inclusion of the no caste tribe answer option and the limited attention to how caste and religion intersect for religious minorities, the decision to not create or use preset caste lists for over 75% of the population who were not enumerated as SC or ST heavily shaped later processes of data collection and publication. Over 4.6 million responses were recorded for the caste-wise data. In some instances within a particular region, more than 40 different spellings were recorded. Unsurprisingly, no government agency wanted to take responsibility for the collected caste-wise data in the SEC survey. While the Ministry of Rural Development released BPL data in July 2015, and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation published provisional data, BPL data, in 2015, and final BPL data in 2016, the caste-wise data remained unpublished. It became increasingly unclear who was responsible for the collected caste-wise data. Eventually, due to pressure from caste census advocates, the BJP government that was now in power at the time created an expert committee to analyze the caste-wise data. 1 year later, based on information from the ORGI, it seemed that only 1.1% of the caste and religion data still had errors. Yet, by early 2017, media reports indicated that the government did not want to release the caste data, and by mid-2017, the caste-wise data were described as unreliable and deemed unpublishable. So the case of the failed caste count offers a window into the embeddedness of Brahmanism in the administrative bureaucracy. Efforts to count caste in Census 2011 were unsuccessful due to the resistance from within the executive bureaucracy that blocked a project that would have made caste privilege visible, caste privilege and power visible. In particular, the authority of the ORGI and the Home Ministry, which the ORGI is housed within, was the foundation of the bureaucratic deflection that unfolded. Once the caste-wise enumeration was inserted into another state project, the bureaucracy deflected its responsibility, and ideologies of castelessness structured the collection and commensuration of caste-wise data. This case illustrates the ideological and practical challenges to commensurating caste in Brahmanical institutions. The inclusion of the no caste tribe answer option and the inclusion and the exclusion of the OBC and general state administrative categories in the questionnaire highlight this point, as does the decision not to create preset caste and tribe lists for the enumeration of more than 75% of the population during a supposed caste survey. The lack of public verification, which I didn't discuss today, but the caste-wise data did not undergo a process of public verification like the other data from the BPL survey, prevented the opportunity for the public to help correct and commensurate the data. Little thought was given how to enumerate caste for over 200 million religious minorities. And this lack of planning very much aligned with an ideology of Hindutva. Commensuration was left until after data collection. It was first delayed and then ultimately deemed impossible. And as I've mentioned now multiple times, the collected caste-wise data have not been made public. So similar to the findings from Latin America, the politics of census making in India, in contemporary India, suggests that the politics and practices of enumerating caste are endogenous to the processes that generate caste-based inequality and injustice, not exogenous to them. When processes of state classification seek to disrupt the configuration of power, their failure helps to maintain the status quo of inequality. Bureaucratic deflection has application to other state projects, particularly in efforts that make caste-based power visible or efforts to annihilate caste, as well as other systems of oppression that have structured the formation of bureaucratic expertise and the composition and culture of the executive bureaucracy. The findings from the failed attempt to collect caste-wise data in 2011 often offer insights on what should be done differently when planning and implementing Census 2027, the current moment we find ourselves in. The collected caste-wise data from the SEC survey first must be fully studied to understand the shortcomings and the full set of shortcomings in the design of the questionnaire, the training of enumerators, and processes of data collection and analysis. In addition, related to the questionnaire design, caste tribe data should be collected for all of the major state administrative categories. And in collaboration with state and local government agencies and anti-caste organizations, caste tribe lists for each state administrative category should be developed, finalized, and field tested prior to the census enumeration of caste and tribe. Instead of including a no caste tribe answer option, data collectors should be allowed to record this response when it's provided by respondents. So in that way, similar to the religion question on previous censuses, where respondents can offer up no religion, and the enumerator will record it. Second, or I guess it's really third, the training of enumerators and the instructions for households who self-enumerate, as self-enumeration is now an option in the upcoming census, and we can discuss that more. The training should offer clear instructions on how to think about the enumeration of religious minorities. Census planners must attend to the challenges that arise when trying to collect caste-wise data from religions such as Islam and Christianity that have no theological basis for caste, but practically employ a caste system in South Asia. It will take quite a bit of time to develop clear protocols for the caste-wise enumeration of religious minorities and to develop written guidelines for data collectors and the households that may opt to self-enumerate. Enumerating data of privileged groups worldwide is one of the major challenges that the people who design surveys and implement surveys contend with. And the case is no different within the Indian context. So a lot of thought needs to be put into the complexity of enumerating caste from caste and caste privileged groups, as these data are essential to understand how caste privilege operates. The intersection of gender and caste also needs to be discussed and talked about in the guidelines for enumerators and in the training of enumerators. Since there is no indication that the necessary preparatory work has started to complete this list, to finalize the caste lists and train the enumerators in these areas largely ignored to date, the likelihood that Census 2027 will collect meaningful caste-wise data seems unlikely at this point, even though the data collection hasn't started. The most crucial step, I would argue, to challenge processes of bureaucratic deflection in the upcoming census of 2027 is to create an oversight committee made up of anti-caste scholar activists. From the design of the survey instrument to the creation of caste lists, an oversight committee of anti-caste scholar activists, including Ambedkarite groups like the Boston Study Group, should inform the entire census-making process. The demand for a caste-wise enumeration emerged from scholar activists, and their voices and concerns, along with anti-caste scholars who remain uncertain or even opposed to the collection of caste-wise data, should oversee the entire project. It is the lack of democratic control over data systems that reinforces and reproduces inequality, as scholars such as sociologist Ruha Benjamin have argued. Given the power of castelessness and Hindutva, external oversight will be key to the collection, commensuration, and publication of meaningful census data on caste. A meaningful caste census will only be possible if anti-caste groups and coalitions help to provide oversight and external accountability to the entire process. Even then, the hard work will still remain to analyze, circulate, and then use the data to annihilate caste and build more egalitarian institutions. Okay, so many thanks to, funding support for I guess, over a decade from multiple institutions to make this research possible. That's sort of the column on the left. And then the column on the right is really instrumental research assistance, both in India and in the US, by a whole team of people that made this research and this project possible. So I'm so grateful for every institution and person that is listed here on this final slide. So I will stop there. So it's 45 minutes. Should I end my screen share, Arif?
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Vithayathil. Yeah, you can turn your screen share off.
My apologies.
No worries.
Zoom is
You can keep it on the first page or something like that in case people wanted to go back to certain slides.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
No worries.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So thank you. And I'll kick off with a few questions, and then we will open up. So yeah, very, very enlightening, and highly recommend people to read this book. Please go through sections and especially methodology, which will become increasingly relevant. Is this a new caste census? The first nationwide caste census kicks off later this year. So, Professor Vithayathil, just to start off, so there are two aspects of resistance, or like two major groups of resistance to the caste census process. One, of course, is the bureaucratic deflection and the bureaucratic resistance, which you talk about in detail in the book, that how it was deflected. And there is, on the other side, there is sort of like the civil society, or the not really common people. Like, for example, in 2011, when the caste census was announced, and you have mentioned in your book, Amitabh Bachchan, the movie star from India, he tweeted, "Meri Jati Hindustani," my caste is Indian, that I don't have a caste. And actually, there was a campaign which got kicked off because of that, and people started saying, "Yo, we don't have caste, we're Indians," and stuff like that. And very recently, we saw in Karnataka survey, when a very prominent Indian, of course, and very rich family, and coming from Brahmin caste, Sudha Murthy, she refused to participate in the survey, saying that we are not from those castes, quote unquote. So I don't need to participate in this survey. And since it was just a survey, not a census, which is mandated, the enumerator did not collect the data. Now, the issue is that there are two aspects here. There is one aspect of numbers, like what caste has what population, what number, and stuff like that. And the other aspect is of privilege, that because of their caste status, what kind of privilege they have managed to gather, what kind of wealth they have managed to amass. Now, the first aspect, at local level, at state level, we have the data. Officially in Karnataka and in Bihar, now we have caste data. But unofficially, and I would say very reliably, we have data at village level, at block level, at district level, because all the political parties collect this data. Whereas the privilege, we don't know, in the sense that because of their caste status and caste connection and caste power, how much privilege, how much wealth they have accumulated. So going forward, how do you think, in terms of resistance to this idea, do you think which is primary, like just the numbers, or kind of privilege, or a combination of both, or rather the exposure of the privilege?
Okay, so you raised many different important points, and I just want to make sure that because you had mentioned at least two types of resistance, right? And so there's this resistance that's coming, I would argue, from kind of within this ideology of castelessness, whether it's the reference that you made to Amitabh Bachchan or Sudha Murthy, right, which is this idea that there is this category of Indian that is casteless, and therefore it's kind of this nationalistic view that caste is a thing of the past or something like that, right? And it very much, as you mentioned, obscures the process of enumerating caste privilege. I want to make sure that, and there are other types of even civil society groups that I think you're hinting to that also are maybe critical of a potential caste census. But so I want to make sure I'm answering your question first. Do you want me to that I'm understanding your question first, which is, do you want me to focus on this civil society group, or also kind of map out that other area of resistance?
I think civil society group would be better. Focus on civil society group. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right that that we know that that political parties have long had numbers on caste, right? And so it's embedded within the infrastructure by which political parties organize and by which elections are battled. That is of course different from having official census data on the caste-wise enumeration, both for the reason that you said, because embedding the enumeration of caste within the census. And when I say the enumeration of caste within the census, I'm talking about the full caste-wise enumeration. So as you're referencing, there would also be data from privileged castes, from OBCs, which we don't have now. So that would give us the official numbers that could be used for a range of kind of anti-caste policies, including reservations. And it would also, though, critical to including it in the census is it's just not a number count. As you mentioned, it would give a lot of information about the relationality of caste, the ownership of resources, access to public services, education, networks, et cetera. And so you could imagine the civil society resistance is, it's both of those things, the kind of official numbers count from the census that allows then the structuring of state policy in a way that when political parties are collecting it, is known for kind of electoral mobilizing, but it isn't used for reservation policies. That's why, for many judicial decisions, right, they'll say, like, we need caste-wise data. And then also, though, the civil society resistance is related to the additional knowledge production of understanding how those numbers intersect with the range of sort of socioeconomic, material and educational social capital resources that the census collects data on. So, I think both the numbers, the official numbers, and understanding the more complex way that caste intersects are both areas where this type of resistance, does not want to be enumerated. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Did
Thank you very
I
much.
answer your question?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
definitely. Because I think it always comes up that we are looking at very prominent people who are kind of against the caste census, but for different reasons. But this is somewhere they kind of coalesce or their points come through. Like on the center right, we can of course see somebody like Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who kind of says that, oh, this is gonna be just the term he uses, that the grammar of social justice is gonna be replaced by arithmetic of caste, which is, but the problem is that what are you talking about? Like, as if arithmetic of caste, like we don't do politics on basis of caste in this country. I mean, don't you think that every political party has like to the village level data on caste? So this is like totally misplaced. But on the other side, we have somebody like Professor Anand Teltumbre, who has also criticized this, and he actually wrote a whole book on it, the caste consensus. That his point of view is that these are is a statist step. The state is putting you into boxes, and again, rather than struggling for or fighting for universal access to education and healthcare, we will still bog down in this. So they are coming from different directions, very different thought streams, but this is where they converge. That somehow having this will be detrimental, or somehow we don't have it. So that kind of issue, which I'm completely at loss, that how can people even think that in a society which is a caste society, we won't have numbers on caste. But the issue is that what we need is that how that aspect, the Brahmanical caste system, translates into privilege for privileged caste groups. So that is the battle here. Just one more before I open up, is that this kind of resistance to having like a caste, having numbers, or like identifying people on caste, is very different from when it comes to identifying people based on religion, right? Like, we don't hear these arguments that why the state is in the business of identifying religious groups like Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs, Hindus, whatever. Whereas that has not, as if that does not have any implication for state policy. Whereas having a caste category officially enumerated will have detrimental effect on state policy or the so-called progress of the country. I mean, in your book, you didn't talk about it here, but in your book, you talk about that how Arya Samaj ran a whole movement in 1931 against people, telling people not to identify with their caste, but say that they're Aryans and they're Bharatvasi and stuff like that. So how do you see these two streams, like having no problem with religious classification, whereas having a lot of problem with caste classification? I mean, and in the process of nation building, if you can situate it, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So, yes, we have this long history of organizing around the census, including around colonial censuses, in which more reformist organizations and more radical organizers tried to shape how the colonial censuses enumerated caste and religion, and how people offered up respondents. So, you mentioned the Arya Samaj, and even before the Arya Samaj, down south in places like Tamil Nadu, you had leading anti-caste scholars, kind of challenging this idea that, of how to enumerate Dalits, and over time, this back and forth of, between Gandhi and Ambedkar and others about the enumeration of Dalits as Hindus, requiring that, or could they be separate from the Hindu fold? So I think this question of, in my talk, I spoke about the way in which I observed in 2011, 2012, 2013, the no caste option emerging as, being utilized by caste elites. But there's a long history, obviously, of anti-caste organizers using no caste to promote a different politics. But that wasn't what I observed. So I think I just want to mention that since you were talking about the Arya Samaj. And we can talk about why, right? This was part of a BPL survey, and so and SCST status is one of the components of that. So there's a different reason to provide that information. But the question that you have that's really important is trying to think about this interplay of the enumeration of religion, caste, and nation building, right? And so one of the things that happened alongside the project of nation building was the construction of a Hindu majority, right? And so many scholars have written about the construction of Hindu majority. That project was political, it was also cultural and, religious and a variety of things. But politically, it was advantageous for the kind of dominant, leaders of the dominant kind of nationalist movement to have a large Hindu majority and to include, and so the enumeration of religion was quite important, right? It was very political, and it really made a difference if who was counted as Hindu in order to kind of validate and give credence to the fact that the Congress Party should be the representatives of all Indians, right? So I think you're absolutely right to point out that the enumeration of religion is crucial to projects of nation building, that enumeration has been contested, right? We have more than a century of Dalit, of ex-untouchable groups organizing and saying, this is unfair for you to require us to be enumerated. This is in historical caste census as Hindu, but then, you don't allow us to enter the temple or et cetera, right? We're excluded, we're discriminated against. But and so we saw that battle where Gandhi was saying, I want untouchables should be enumerated as Hindus, and Ambedkar and others were saying no, and so yes, in the kind of bringing this forward a little bit into the independent India, the enumeration of religion has been ongoing, to your point again, Arif, and so that was justified because scheduled tribes can be from any religious community, but scheduled castes, right, in 1951 were limited again to Hindus. And so you had to enumerate, again, religion in order to ensure that other, that the only groups that had access to the scheduled caste category in 1951 were enumerated religiously as Hindu. And so again, we see the politics of the creation of the Hindu majority, but also caste and religion. And so it's continued on. The stated justification was that to enumerate scheduled castes, we need to collect data on religion, and that has obviously continued on.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to questions now. So I think we have Mallikarjun has their hand up. So please go ahead, Hemant, if you can unmute him.
Yeah,
Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is, I think we are talking about. I just joined a little bit late, so 5-10 minutes late. So my question is this discussion about achieving the equality, right? So like as Ambedkar said, like I'm just asking. Here I'm from Bangalore. So my question is, it's like looks like our target is annihilation of caste based on again identifying the segregating the people on the caste basis. Right? So how this is going to work? One way you are trying to get the data, trying to force the people to tell your caste, whether ST or ST, or I think 2 days back I have received a SMS from the government saying, so people will come to your house saying it's a OBC survey. Okay, so again, socio-economic survey. So this is what I have a doubt. So one thing we are talking about annihilation of caste, and at the same time, we are trying to divide the people by giving an identity based on the caste. Right? So don't you think these are the two contradicting points? And another thing, yeah, so if at all the caste is discriminating, definitely I agree with the caste is kind of a discrimination. Nobody wants to tell, especially in Indian society, nobody wants to tell. It's kind of a ladder society, right? So we know, right? So like the lower group don't want to tell the caste, but still people are identifying themselves, even though I don't know from the centuries, still nobody has given up the caste. Still, people are carrying their caste from the centuries, maybe thousands of years. We don't know. I don't want to get into that. So the thing is, if at all, this caste-based survey, if you are counting and giving some benefits in terms of reservations, in terms of some money transfer, this, that, or whatever it is, are we going to achieve the equality? Right? So you are giving an economic benefits, but you are not trying to change the mindset or the treating of the people, like by identifying the caste. Right? Suppose I'm an SC, right? So if I'm telling I'm an SC and I have a kind of a internal feeling I'm a lower guy.
Okay.
Right? So if you're a Brahmin, I don't know about the Brahmin, how differently they'll feel good. So why do we need this identity? Why are we forcing the people to identify the caste? And again, our target is to annihilation of the caste.
Yes, we got your point. Thank you, Mr. Mallikarjun. Thank you. So over to Professor Vithayathil, please. Thank you very much for your question. We got the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. We talked at the sort of at the beginning of the Q&A, Arif mentioned that there were different reasons why groups are opposed to the caste-wise enumeration, okay? And so we talked about one being kind of this casteless view of society, this kind of idea that with economic development and in an independent democratic India, caste will eventually be eroded, right? And so we don't need to enumerate caste, we don't need to count caste, because with development, that's sort of sufficient, right? There's also, I think a related but differing point of view that maybe aligns more with your own point of view, and that is that the collection of caste data is completely insufficient to annihilate caste, right? That other things are required, and Professor Teltumbe writes about that in his book, Caste Consensus, right? That we need egalitarian institutions, that we need the provision of basic services, an equal starting point in education, housing, healthcare access, all of these things. And that without that happening, if you are just focused on collecting caste data, that's not going to annihilate caste. So I'm not sure if that is kind of the place that you're coming from. I think where those are, we can talk more about that position, and I pulled some quotes from his book I'm happy to talk about. But I think there is, in terms of why the data could be helpful, is some of the things we've been talking about so far, which is it's not the collection of data itself will not annihilate caste. I think you're absolutely right to prove that, right? And so when people are talking about the caste census as the save-all, as something that will end caste, destroy caste hierarchy, that is overstating its potential, right? It is a tool that can help us understand and name inequality. It is a tool that can help us understand and document the extent of caste-based privilege. And that's really important to counter this ideology that caste no longer matters, that meritocracy and hard work determines what's going to happen to people, as opposed to an acknowledgement of the ongoing ladder that you referenced or the ongoing structural discrimination. So without documenting caste-based privilege, it's very easy for this dominant ideology being that caste is a thing of the past, right? And so once you have the numbers, then I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of additional hard work that needs to be done to use the caste-wise data to then inform state policies and arrange, whether it's reservations, but a broader set of government policies, including the pushing for universal policies, to counter this ideology of castelessness. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Got it. Okay, Venkat, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Trina, for a wonderful lecture. So this is a very, very an important topic of current India, and it impacts, as you said, the large majority of the people who are actually marginalized. I mean, India is the only country the majority is marginalized. Okay. So my question is, a little bit of a history. I just want to understand. I mean, Ambedkar has done a lot during the transition, independence, constitution, and all that. One question always bothered me. Maybe I didn't do a lot of, effort to find out, but the caste census actually was started in 1881. Imagine 1881 with British. Okay. How they did it. I mean, now they were giving all kinds of reasons. Oh, we cannot do this, we cannot do that. I mean, but they've done in 1881, and I think they've done 6 times, right? They did since then to 1931. Every year they have done it, and then even 1941 they have done it. But I think due to the war and all that, it was not tabulated, it was not accounted. So the well-documented caste census that is available for entire India is the 1931.
Mm.
Of course, when the 1951 or independent India wanted to do, they shunned that. They completely, didn't want to do the caste census at all. So this is the Congress government we're talking about. Okay. So do you give some historical what happened? Any idea about, why it was dropped, or people like Ambedkar, what kind of, arguments he had? I mean, any that really bothers me. I mean, Congress, even today, now they're coming back and saying a lot of things. They've done historically a lot of wrongs, okay, including backward class commission. I mean, there's a huge long history of how they come until Janata Party government came, until VP Singh did it. That was like delayed by 50 years. So this is doing of Congress. So I just want to understand the dynamic, why they decided to drop, and what Ambedkar's role, anything in that, how we try to fight. So yeah, I would appreciate if you have any information on that.
Yeah. So the decision to drop the caste-wise enumeration. So you're absolutely right. Let me back up. We had this long history of collecting caste-wise data in decennial censuses. So every 10 years, caste-wise data were collected in the non-synchronous census even of 1871 and 72. And then
Even
as you,
1831.
yeah, and then even as you mentioned in this first synchronous census was where it was collected across the territory around the same time in 1881, as you mentioned. But so every 10 years it was collected. It was, a very messy process, and it was both used by the colonial state. The caste and religion data were both used by the colonial state to divide and rule, so it was a tool of colonial exploitation, and that very much needs to be named. It was also used by anti-caste activists to demand changes, right? To push for proportional representation, to push for representation on legislative councils, and to make a lot of demands. So it was, you could see it as kind of the data itself can be used for a variety of purposes, right? And we see that in the colonial period. One of the reasons that in independent India, Nehru and the kind of political leaders at the time, there was a focus on building a unified Indian identity, and how they talked about it is the census is primarily going to be an economic instrument that will support economic development. So we are no longer going to collect caste data, because those data which took so much time. So you're right. When people say it's too difficult to collect the data, I think you're right to say, yeah, but the data have been collected since the late 1800s. So it's not difficult. I mean, it can be done if there's political will. But the flip side of it is the Census Bureau folks always said this is the most cumbersome part of the data collection, compiling and analyzing these data. So the kind of Congress party coming in said, we're now going to focus on economic data. And if you compare these kind of historical caste censuses with the census from 1951 or later, it goes from the tables on caste and tribe sometimes being 1/4 of the census report or longer to just being a few pages in post-colonial India. So all of that to say that it was very much tied in with this Nehruvian ideology. But Ambedkar disagreed, as you might suspect, right? Because Ambedkar and other anti-caste activists had been using these data to push for policy reforms, for policy reforms that he very much believed would be part of the state infrastructure to annihilate caste, right? And so I have a quote in my book where Ambedkar is writing about this, and he writes very critically about this. He says, the last census, he's talking about Census 1951, omits altogether the caste tables, which had been the feature of the Indian census, ever since its birth. The Home Minister of the Government of India, who is responsible for this omission, was of the opinion that if a word does not exist in a dictionary, it can be proved that the fact for which the word stands does not exist. One can only pity the intelligence of the author. End quote. Okay, so he is speaking very critically about the executive bureaucracy, right? Why is the Home Minister refusing to collect this data? And he's frustrated because he wants to cite the census data on caste to describe caste hierarchy and its effects in order to inform government policies. In this case, he was writing about the formation of linguistic states. And, he's arguing, obviously, that not enumerating and publishing caste-wise data is a naive approach to the annihilation of caste, right? So he was frustrated by many things at this moment, but this is one of the things that he is writing about because he's saying, how can we form policy? He's a policymaker. He's along with being a social theorist and scholar and activist. And so as a policymaker, these data are quite crucial, right? As a legal scholar, as a maker of laws and policy, yeah.
you lost that battle, right? Yeah. So like so many other things, right?
Yeah.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
will have the last question from Arvind, who posted on chat. So I'm going to read it out for you. So Arvind is asking, he's saying, very much appreciate this talk and insights of the speaker. The question is, I see that there are problems with ensuring full participation in the survey and possibly in the design of the survey. Do you think there could even be such a thing as a well-designed survey such that full or almost full participation would provide a reliable result? So this is from Arvind.
Okay, Arvind, that's a great question. I think with a sort of survey, in the way that if we think about state level surveys, whether they're run by BCC commissions or other state level or local governments, that's one of the challenges, right? Because participation is voluntary. I think when you talk about the decennial census, and this is why the push is to have the caste-wise enumeration not in a state survey or in another sort of government survey, but to include it in the decennial census, because legally, the census is something that where participation is required, right? And so the question of participation and the census, the decennial census, has a whole apparatus of enrolling participation, right? There's all this publicity. The schools are talking about it. There's so much. There's big posters, and it's this whole media bonanza to ensure that communities and people know that the census has started and that participation is mandatory. So I think while this question of the survey, I think that point is true. If you're trying to collect these data in a different type of survey, whether it's a sample survey or a survey that wishes to collect data from everyone at the state level, participation can be trickier and caste elites can bow out in the way that Arif was mentioning. But if you're talking about the census, I think that's your best bet at ensuring participation. But the thing I do want to mention is a lot of work needs to happen to make sure, just because the state right now is saying that we're going to collect caste-wise data, we can't take that at face value, because there are a lot of ways to have the appearance of collecting caste-wise data, but then not actually designing the survey instrument, training the enumerators, and doing the preparatory work to create the caste lists for the caste elite categories, as well as all the other categories, to ensure that data collection in the census actually collects these caste-wise data, right? And creates meaningful data. And that will require oversight, because this current political administration is not committed to annihilating caste, as we very much know. And so it's going to be civil society, anti-caste organizations that are pressuring it to do this in a meaningful and deliberate and thoughtful way.
Thank you very much. Haritha, are you there? Please go ahead.
Yeah, Arif, I'm here. Thank you so much, Professor Trina, for your valuable time today here. The Boston Study Group strives to engage in meaningful discussions that inspire positive change in our society. Whether you're a scholar, activist, student, or concerned citizen, your presence and participation are invaluable in furthering Dr. Ambedkar's vision of more just, equitable, and inclusive world. On behalf of our group, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude for your participation in today's Ambedkar lecture series. We hope that the knowledge shared during the lectures has inspired you. If you have any questions or need additional information about the lecture series and also about the Awakened, BSG's digital magazine, please contact us at bostonstudygroup.com. We look forward to welcoming you to future events. We thank you once again today for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Arita.
you very
Thank you,
much.
Professor.